The thermometer nailed outside the Pine Hollow Mercantile read -36 degrees when the wind died without warning. That was the moment Caleb Rowan felt the knot settle in his stomach. Wind meant a storm was passing through. No wind meant it had stopped moving. Stopped storms didn't leave. He stood under the store's warped awning, breath fogging thick in the air, and stared down the single frozen street where snow had swallowed the hitching rails nearly to the crossbar. Somewhere beneath that white silence were wagons, fence posts, and paths people relied on to stay alive. And somewhere above the town, half a mile up the shale slope of Ironcap Ridge, was the stone cave everyone had laughed at all summer. The one Signe Larsen lived in. Signe had arrived in Pine Hollow, Wyoming Territory on September 2nd, 1890, with a handcart, 2 oilcloth-wrapped bundles, and a dented trunk that had crossed the Atlantic before it crossed the plains. She was 36 years old, widowed, and had walked the final 9 miles from the rail spur at Red Bluff because the freight driver wanted more than she could spare. The land office clerk had offered her a clean, open claim east of town. Flat ground, easy building, good sun. Signe had thanked him, stepped outside, and kept walking. She followed the ridge trail until the timber thinned and limestone cut through the slope like exposed bone. That was where she found it. A deep stone hollow tucked into the ridge face, 35 feet back, angled south, with a narrow spring threading out of the rear wall and disappearing into moss. She stood there a long time. Then she turned around and went back to file her claim. People noticed. Walter Hensley, who'd broken land in the territory before Pine Hollow had a name, noticed first. He'd lost 2 toes to frostbite in the winter of '83 and never passed up a chance to make it someone else's lesson. "That hole will freeze you solid," he told her, outside the Mercantile, lifting his pant leg to show the missing toes. "Cold drops. You're building yourself a stone grave." Signe nodded politely and kept hauling her things uphill. Patrick O'Doyle, the stone layer who'd set every foundation in town worth trusting, was blunter. "You don't live in caves," he said. "You die in them. Damp stone, no airflow. You'll rot before winter's over." Then there was Edna Crowell, who ran the boarding house and believed survival depended on order as much as strength. "A woman alone up there?" she said, loud enough for 3 tables to hear. "That isn't sensible, and when the weather turns it'll be the town's problem." The last voice belonged to Isaac Two Feathers, who trapped the high country and knew its habits better than anyone. "Bear use that ridge," he told Signe quietly, "and cats, they remember places." Signe listened to them all. Then she went back up the ridge. What Pine Hollow didn't know, what none of them could know, was that Signe Larsen had been born in a mountain valley in western Norway where winter didn't threaten. It arrived, stayed, and tested everything. Her father had taught her early that the ground was not the enemy. Air stole heat, stone kept it. At depths below 8 feet, the earth didn't care what the sky was doing. It stayed steady, 50 degrees, sometimes a little more. A house that fought winter burned itself empty. A house that leaned into the land borrowed warmth instead. Signe spent nearly 3 weeks doing nothing but watching the cave. She tracked the sun's arc, noted how far the light reached at noon, measured drip patterns after rain, timed how long her breath lingered in still air. The opening faced south-southwest, catching what little winter sun would offer. The stone lip extended nearly 12 feet outward, shielding the interior from falling snow. The spring in the back wall ran constant at 51 degrees, never icing, even at night. Most important of all, the cave narrowed as it went back, creating a natural heat trap. October became her working season. She salvaged beams from a collapsed line shack 5 miles downriver, hauling them one by one on a sled she built herself. She erected a false wall 10 feet inside the cave mouth, not to close it off, but to slow the exchange of air. The wall wasn't hollow wood. She packed it thick with dried grass, clay, and crushed charcoal, the same way her grandmother had insulated storehouses back home. Beyond it, she built her living space deeper into the stone. She raised the floor 8 inches off the rock using stone piers, allowing moisture to pass underneath instead of soaking upward. Ceiling beams were notched directly into natural ledges, eliminating the need for posts that would rot. Her walls rose only 5 feet before angling inward to meet the cave ceiling. Less surface area, less heat loss. By late October, the space measured 13 feet deep by 10 feet wide. Modest, tight, but wrapped on all sides by limestone that remembered warmth. Her stove was small enough to be laughed at, a compact iron box meant for herders' tents. She placed it against the back wall and ran the flue along the ceiling before exiting near the entrance, forcing smoke and heat to linger. 6 pounds of wood a day kept the space above 60 degrees. In November, while the town burned constantly, Signa sometimes didn't light a fire at all. The cave stayed warm anyway. Curiosity replaced ridicule. Patrick O'Doyle noticed condensation channels carved into the stone, leading moisture away. Walter Hensley noticed she carried less firewood than anyone else. Edna Crowell noticed Sina never looked exhausted. By December, snow came hard. Pine Hollow's woodpiles shrank fast. Caleb Rowan marked the difference in his ledger, sales nearly 50% higher than the previous winter. But on Ironcap Ridge, Sina lived steadily. She woke at dawn, boiled water, let the fire die. Read by reflected light. Walked into town every few days, cheeks flushed, hands steady. Walter still doubted. "February decides these things," he said. Edna shook her head. "She'll be trapped when the big snows hit." Sina had already cut extra wood and stacked it inside the cave lip. She'd cut 3 paths down the ridge, one direct, one sheltered, one long and safe. She didn't believe in luck. Christmas passed quiet. Then January came warm enough to lull people into hope. On January 21st, the temperature dropped 40 degrees in 12 hours. The blizzard arrived before midnight. By the time the wind stopped and the thermometer read -36 degrees Fahrenheit, Caleb Rowan wasn't thinking about firewood or supplies anymore. He was thinking about the woman in the cave, and whether, against all reason, she might be the safest soul in the valley. By the morning of the second day, Pine Hollow no longer felt like a town. It felt like a pocket, sealed, muffled, and shrinking by the hour. The blizzard hadn't eased, it hadn't intensified either, it had simply stayed. Snow fell straight down now, thick and relentless, as if the sky had decided to empty itself all at once. Drifts climbed past windowsills, doors froze shut, smoke hung low over rooftops, trapped under the weight of cold air. Inside the mercantile, Caleb Rowan took inventory by lamplight. Not because he planned to sell much, no one was going anywhere, but because routine was the only thing keeping his thoughts from spiraling. Flour was low, lamp oil lower, firewood dangerously uncertain. He stepped outside briefly, just long enough to check the thermometer again. 39 degrees Fahrenheit, still no wind. That's when he saw the first man stumble down the street. It was Henry Cole, a farmer from the South Flats, face grey, beard iced solid. He leaned hard against the mercantile wall, gasping. "Stove went out," Henry managed. "Wood's gone, chimney iced, kids are cold." Caleb didn't ask questions. He helped Henry inside, sat him near the stove, and poured hot water slowly so his hands wouldn't crack from the shock. By noon, 3 more families had knocked. By evening, the schoolhouse had been opened as a warming shelter, its potbelly stove fed continuously by whatever could be spared. Benches were dragged close, children slept in piles of coats, adults took turns tending the fire. But even there, the cold pressed in. Walls leaked heat faster than it could be replaced. Every door opening stole warmth like a thief. The fire ate wood faster than anyone had planned for. Someone mentioned Ironcap Ridge, quietly at first. "She'll be warm," a woman whispered. "That Norwegian woman." Edna Crowell shut it down immediately. No one's walking up that slope in this. But as the second night fell and the schoolhouse temperature dipped despite the roaring stove, the idea didn't go away. It grew. Meanwhile, above town, Signe Larsen woke to silence. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind. The cave held steady at 58 degrees without a fire. She lit the stove anyway, not from necessity but habit, and listened. No wind, no shifting air, just the faint sound of snow sliding down stone outside the entrance. She checked the spring, flow steady. She checked the smoke drawer, clean. She ate slowly and waited. By midday the silence broke. Voices, faint, strained. She stepped to the cave mouth and saw movement below, dark figures against the white slope. 3 of them, struggling, stopping often. Signe didn't hesitate. She cleared the entrance fully, propped the inner wall door open, and added a log to the stove. When the first man reached her, Henry Cole, he collapsed to his knees, sobbing, hands numb beyond pain. "You were right," he said through cracked lips. "God help me, you were right." Signe pulled him inside. The others followed, 2 women, both shaking violently, one carrying a bundled child barely conscious from cold. Signe wrapped them in blankets she'd kept ready, sat them near the back wall where the stone radiated warmth like a slow pulse. The child cried when feeling returned. That sound alone made the trip worth it. By evening, more came, some in pairs, some alone. One man with frostbitten ears who'd lost his way and followed the ridge by memory more than sight. Signe didn't ask permission. She didn't ask names. She adjusted airflow, managed space, fed the stove lightly, steadily. The cave didn't feel crowded. It felt full. Word reached Pine Hollow by lantern signal, 3 flashes from the ridge. "She's taking people in." That changed everything. Against Edna's protests, a small group set out at dawn on the 3rd day, roped together, slow, careful. Caleb Rowan went with them. He'd never climbed Iron Cap Ridge in winter before. He realized quickly how foolish that had been. The wind scoured some sections bare while piling snow chest-high in others. One misstep would mean a broken leg and a quiet death. When they reached the cave, Caleb expected chaos. Instead, he found calm. People sat quietly. Some slept. Some talked in low voices. The air was warm, not stifling, not smoky, just stable. Signe moved among them like she'd done this all her life. Caleb stared at the stone walls, the angled ceiling, the careful way the stove's heat seemed to linger instead of rush upward and vanish. "How?" he asked finally. Signe handed him a cup of warm water. "I didn't fight winter," she said. "I stepped out of its way." By the 4th day, Pine Hollow was in trouble. 2 roofs collapsed under accumulated snow. One family burned furniture, another burned fence posts. No one died. Because those who couldn't endure longer made the climb. The cave became the town's anchor. When the blizzard finally broke on the 5th morning, the sun rose over a valley that looked reshaped, snow sculpted into hard edges, paths erased, old assumptions buried. People came down from Iron Cap Ridge slowly. They didn't talk much. They didn't laugh. They looked at the town differently. And when someone mentioned tearing down that cave dwelling come spring because it wasn't proper, no one laughed this time. If you're still reading, leave a comment about a moment when the thing everyone dismissed became the one thing that worked. Pine Hollow did not celebrate when the blizzard finally loosened its grip. There was no cheer when the sky cleared on the 6th morning, no rush into the streets, no laughter carried on cold air. People stepped outside carefully, as if the storm might still be listening. Snow stood shoulder-high in places, packed hard as timber. Roof lines sagged. Fences had vanished entirely, swallowed by white. The town looked smaller, compressed, humbled. Those who had climbed Iron Cap Ridge returned first. Edna Crowell stood outside the boarding house that afternoon, arms folded tight, watching people return from the ridge. Her building had survived, but only because guests had crowded into one room and burned through nearly everything she had. She waited until Signe Larsson finally walked down herself. Signe looked tired, not exhausted, just worn in the deep way that comes from responsibility carried too long without rest. Edna cleared her throat. "You should have told us." Signe stopped. "Told you what?" "That it would work," Edna said almost accusingly. Signe met her eyes. "You wouldn't have believed me." Edna didn't argue. Thomas Hensley came next, boots mismatched, coat patched poorly, missing fingers wrapped in wool. "I misjudged," he said, blunt as ever. "Badly." Signe nodded. "You survived, that's enough." "No," Thomas said. "It isn't." He gestured around them. "We've been freezing ourselves half to death every winter because we thought suffering was proof of sense." Signe didn't answer. She didn't need to. Over the next week, Pine Hollow began to change, not dramatically, but deliberately. People didn't talk about rebuilding yet. They talked about fixing, sealing gaps, banking earth against north walls, extending roofs, moving woodpiles closer, cutting vents where none had existed. Caleb Rowan noticed something else. People were asking questions. Not, "Why did you do this?" but "How?" How deep did you build? How thick is the stone? How do you stop damp? Why doesn't the smoke back up? Signe answered carefully. She never exaggerated, never claimed guarantees. She talked about margins, about forgiveness, about how cold punished mistakes but rewarded patience. Patrick O'Doyle came up the ridge with a measuring stick and a notebook. "I've been laying stone wrong," he said after walking the cave twice. "Not weak, just careless." He pointed at the angled walls. "You reduced surface area." Signe nodded. "Less surface means less escape." "And the floor?" "Air underneath," she said. "Moisture goes where it wants. You just give it somewhere safe to go." Patrick stared at the stone. "I could do this." "Yes," Signe said, "but you wouldn't copy it. You'd adapt it." That idea took root faster than any structure ever could. By late February, Pine Hollow looked like a workshop. Snow still lay thick, but people were already planning against next winter, not hoping it would be kind, but assuming it would not. Caleb brought out his ledger one night and rewrote a column header. Instead of firewood sold, he wrote firewood burned. The difference mattered. He noticed families who'd sheltered in the cave burned less even after returning home. They'd learned restraint, timing. They'd felt what stable warmth was like and chased it less desperately. One afternoon, Isaac Twofeathers visited Signe alone. He stood at the cave entrance for a long time before speaking. "Mountain remembers," he said, "when people listen." Signe smiled faintly. "So does stone." Isaac nodded. "You didn't fight this place. That's why it didn't push back." By March, the inspectors arrived. 2 men from the county seat, boots too clean, expressions too stiff. They took notes, measured distances, frowned at the cave dwelling. "This isn't approved housing," the senior one said. "No permit, no inspection." Caleb stepped forward before Signe could answer. "No one died," he said flatly. The inspector blinked. "That's not the point." Caleb held his ground. "It should be." The men left with papers unsigned. But they didn't order demolition. Not yet. Winter lingered into April. Cold nights, softening days. Signe spent more time in town now, helping others modify what they had. She showed people how to carve drainage channels, how to line walls with earth, how to think of heat as something you kept, not something you chased. No one laughed anymore. By the time snow finally retreated from Ironcap Ridge, Pine Hollow was no longer the same place. It hadn't grown stronger, it had grown smarter, and everyone knew the next winter would decide whether that knowledge held. If you're still reading, leave a comment, not about caves, but about a time survival required unlearning what everyone else swore was common sense. Spring did not arrive in Pine Hollow all at once. It never did. It crept in sideways, hesitant, testing whether the valley had learned enough to be trusted again. Snow retreated from south-facing slopes first, revealing dark earth scarred by drifts and meltwater. Roofs wept steadily through the afternoons, refreezing each night into dangerous sheets of ice. But something had shifted. People weren't waiting for warmth anymore. They were preparing for cold. The cave on Ironcap Ridge became a place people visited even when they didn't need shelter, not out of superstition and not out of reverence, out of study. They walked its perimeter, measured its angles, noted where snow lingered and where it slid free. They watched how meltwater traveled, how the stones stayed cool during midday sun and warm after nightfall. Signe Larsen never turned anyone away, but she also never let anyone mistake what they were seeing for magic. "This only works because it belongs here," she said often. "Put it somewhere else without thinking, and it will fail." That warning mattered, because by late April, the county inspectors returned. This time they came with authority. 4 men rode in from the county seat with papers stamped and folded stiff from importance. The lead inspector, Harold Keane, had the tone of someone used to being obeyed. He stood at the cave entrance, arms crossed, and shook his head. "This structure violates multiple habitation standards," he said. "Unpermitted dwelling, improper ventilation, no defined egress routes." Signe listened quietly. Caleb Rowan stood nearby, jaw tight. Keane continued, "Under ordinary circumstances, this would be ordered dismantled immediately." Ordinary circumstances. That phrase hung in the cold spring air like a challenge. Patrick O'Doyle spoke up. "Ordinary circumstances froze half this town solid." Keane shot him a look. "This isn't a debate." Caleb stepped forward. "Then why did you ride out here?" Keane hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. "Because," he said carefully, "the county lost 3 families this winter, not here, elsewhere, and they want to know why." No one answered immediately. Then Signe spoke. "Because they built to look correct," she said, "not to behave correctly." Keane frowned. "That's not a technical explanation." "It's the only one that matters," Signe replied. They inspected everything: the stove, the flue path, the floor gap, the drainage channels, the false wall that slowed airflow without trapping moisture, the spring-fed water source, the multiple access paths carved into the ridge. They took notes for nearly 3 hours. When they finished, Keane removed his gloves and rubbed his hands slowly, as if trying to warm something deeper than skin. "This structure cannot be approved," he said finally. A murmur moved through the gathered townspeople. "But," he continued, raising a hand, "it also cannot be ignored." He turned to Signe. "If we order this torn down, and someone dies next winter who could have lived using what you've shown, that responsibility doesn't rest easily." Signe met his eyes. "Nor should it." Keane exhaled. "There is a provision, rarely used, experimental habitation under extreme conditions, temporary classification, subject to documentation." Caleb blinked. "You're not ordering demolition?" Keane shook his head. "Not yet." The words spread through Pine Hollow faster than meltwater. The cave would stand, not because it followed the rules, because the rules had failed first. Summer that year was different, not easier, but clearer. People didn't rush to rebuild bigger. They rebuilt wiser. Earth berms appeared along north walls, roof lines stretched outward, cellars went deeper, ventilation became intentional instead of accidental. Firewood use dropped across the valley, not because winters were warmer, because homes stopped bleeding heat. Signe became something she never asked to be, a reference point. Builders from other valleys rode in quietly. They didn't ask for permission to copy, they asked for explanation. Why this angle? Why not higher ceilings? Why fewer windows? Signe answered honestly. Because winter finds height, because heat escapes upward, because light is less valuable than stability in January. She refused to draw plans. "Plans get copied," she said. "Understanding gets adapted." By autumn, Pine Hollow looked less like a frontier town and more like a settlement that expected to be there next spring. When the first snow fell that year, no one panicked. Stoves were lit deliberately. Woodpiles stood dry and close, doors sealed properly. Caleb Rowan watched smoke rise evenly across the valley and realized something quietly astonishing. Winter had lost its teeth, not because it was weaker, but because it was expected. The second blizzard came in January, not as violent as the year before, but still cruel. Wind-driven snow, temperatures near 40 below, the kind of cold that punished arrogance. This time, no one climbed Iron Cap Ridge seeking refuge, because no one needed to. The cave still held steady, of course, but so did the town. Signa spent those days alone, as she preferred, listening to the stone breathe warmth back into the space she'd shaped for it. She thought of the first voices that had mocked her. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt relieved. When she passed years later, it wasn't during a storm. It was in summer, quietly, without urgency. People didn't dismantle the cave. They preserved it, not as a monument, as a lesson. Pine Hollow would eventually fade the way all small towns do. Routes shifted, names changed, maps forgot. But the way people built in that valley never returned to what it had been. They'd learned something winter had taught brutally and without apology. Safety is not tradition. Safety is not permission. Safety is alignment, with land, with climate, with reality. If you've read all 4 parts, leave a comment. Not about caves, not about blizzards, but about a time being right mattered less than being prepared, and preparation saved lives. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.